Stand up and get out.
You already saw my identification.
I said stand up.
You've been told who I am. Verify it.
You don't tell me how to run this.
I'm telling you the step you skipped.
You think flashing a badge means I'm just supposed to walk away?
No. I think it means you stop guessing and check.
You're being non-compliant.
No.
Imagine the shock when a patrol officer snapped handcuffs on a man who had just told him he was Internal Affairs Chief Marcus Hale. This investigation followed the moment a routine stop inside a neighborhood restaurant turned into an illegal detention in front of customers, staff, security cameras, and the officer's own body cam. This wasn't a harmless mistake. It was open defiance of protocol, and it blew up fast. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you follow stories about abuse of power, body cam footage, and real accountability like the video and subscribe, Marcus Hale wasn't working that night. He was off duty in plain clothes, seated near the back of a busy restaurant during dinner service. He had spent years investigating officer misconduct, bad arrests, false reports, and force complaints. He knew the habits. He knew the excuses. He also knew when an officer had already decided to make a scene. The patrol officer was Evan Mercer. He came in on a minor check tied to a vague complaint at the restaurant. Nothing serious. No reported assault. No active fight. No emergency. A normal officer would have walked in, spoken to staff, cleared the issue, and left. Mercer didn't do that. He entered with the kind of attitude that turns simple contact into a power contest. He scanned the room, noticed Hale, and focused on him almost immediately. Not because Hale was loud, not because he was threatening anyone. Hale looked calm, alert, and unimpressed. Some officers read that as confidence. Others read it as disrespect. Mercer clearly chose the second one. He approached the table and demanded identification. Hale gave it to him. Then he showed department credentials and identified himself clearly as Internal Affairs Chief. That should have slowed everything down. Any officer with sense would have verified the credentials, checked with dispatch, or called a supervisor before pushing further. Mercer ignored the opening. That was the first serious mistake. He treated the ID like a challenge instead of information. The whole encounter shifted right there. It stopped being about a restaurant check. It became a patrol officer refusing to admit he might be dealing with someone above him in the chain. Hale stayed seated at first and kept it simple. He identified himself again. He told Mercer there was no basis to detain him. He told him to verify the credentials and call a supervisor. No speech, no yelling, just the facts. Mercer answered with commands. He ordered Hale to stand. He ordered him away from the table. He used the sharp tone officers use when they want instant submission, even though there was still no sign of a crime, no sign of danger, and no reason to turn the contact physical. People nearby started paying attention. Staff slowed down. A few customers stopped eating and watched. The restaurant manager moved closer, then paused when he realized this was already beyond him. Hale stood up slowly. He knew the setting mattered. Tight space, full dining room, cameras everywhere. He also knew Mercer was building a record with posture and volume, not with facts. Officers like that often try to create the appearance of danger after deciding to escalate. Hale kept telling him the same thing. Check the credentials, call a supervisor, stop before this gets worse. Mercer stepped closer and got more aggressive. His body cam captured the tone change. He spoke like he was controlling a suspect. Hale still wasn't resisting. He wasn't reaching. He wasn't threatening. He was just refusing to act intimidated. That seemed to bother Mercer more than anything else. This is where bad stops usually collapse. The officer realizes he's gone too far to back out easily, so he pushes harder. He starts treating non-compliance with his authority as if it's criminal by itself. That's exactly what happened here. Mercer grabbed Hale and moved to cuff him. The room changed instantly. Customers looked up all at once. One server froze beside a table. Someone near the front pulled out a phone. The manager started to ward them, then stopped again when he saw Mercer already forcing the detention forward. Hale did not fight him. He did not give him the reaction Mercer could use later. He identified himself again, and warned that Mercer had no legal basis to put him in restraints. Calm, direct, and clear enough for the camera to catch it, Mercer still cuffed him. That single choice turned a bad encounter into a lawsuit. Handcuffs are force. Force without lawful detention creates a much bigger problem than a rude stop. Mercer either didn't understand that or thought he'd be protected anyway. He put the cuffs on the head of internal affairs in the middle of a public restaurant. And the worst part for him was this. There were too many witnesses, too much video, and too little justification. By then, dispatch had enough information to start connecting the dots. Hale's name mattered. His position mattered even more. Somewhere in the chain, someone realized exactly who was in cuffs and who had put him there. Once that happened, Mercer's version of events stopped controlling the situation. Supervisor Lieutenant Daniel Cross arrived minutes later. Cross walked in, saw Hale restrained, saw Mercer standing over him, and understood the disaster immediately. He didn't need a long explanation. He knew Hale. He knew rank. He knew policy. He also knew there was no clean report that could fix what had already happened in front of civilians and on camera. At that point, Mercer wasn't managing a scene anymore. He was standing in the middle of evidence. Cross moved fast. He separated the officer from the detainee, looked at the credentials himself, and started asking the questions Mercer should have answered before ever touching Hale. What was the crime? What was the suspicion? What justified the cuffs? Mercer had weak answers. Nothing solid. Nothing that matched the level of force. That was the turning point. The badge still sat on Mercer's chest, but the authority had left the room. Hale stayed composed. That mattered. He didn't rant. He didn't try to embarrass anyone. He stated what happened, stated that he had identified himself from the start and made it clear the detention had no lawful basis. Cross listened because at that point he had no choice. The body cam, the restaurant cameras, the witnesses, and the lack of facts all pointed one way. Mercer had crossed the line, and everyone in that restaurant knew they had just watched a patrol officer handcuff the man responsible for investigating officers like him. What happened next was even worse for Officer Evan Mercer, because now the scene had moved out of his hands and into the department's chain of command. Lieutenant Daniel Cross had already seen enough. He had the body cam, he had the credentials, he had a dining room full of witnesses, he had an off-duty internal affairs chief in cuffs with no clear crime, no real threat, and no lawful reason for a detention that had gone physical. That meant Mercer's problem was no longer just Marcus Hale. It was the paperwork, the video, the command staff, the city attorneys, the people who would later have to explain this under oath. Cross had Hale uncuffed at the restaurant, right there, no dragging it out, no fake delay to save face. Hale's credentials were checked again, but at that point, it was already obvious Mercer had ignored them from the beginning. Cross tried to contain the damage, but the damage was already public. Customers had seen it. Staff had seen it. Phones had recorded parts of it. The restaurant had security cameras. Mercer's own body cam had captured the key parts. The department now had a clean timeline of an officer refusing identification, escalating without cause, and handcuffing one of the highest oversight officials in the agency. That is not the kind of thing a department can bury easily. Hale didn't make a speech in the restaurant. He didn't grandstand. He gave his account, identified the decision points where Mercer should have stopped, and left the rest to the process. That mattered. He knew exactly how these cases go wrong. The person who stays factual usually wins later. Mercer, on the other hand, still tried to justify himself. He leaned on the usual language: officer safety, non-compliance, uncertainty, need to control the situation. The problem was simple. None of that matched the video. Hale had identified himself. He had shown credentials. He had asked for a supervisor. He had not threatened Mercer. He had not tried to flee. He had not created any condition that justified cuffs. So now Mercer had another problem. A bad stop is one thing. A bad stop followed by a weak report is worse. Because once the written justification falls apart, it starts looking less like a mistake and more like deliberate misconduct. Before the shift even ended, command staff had been notified. An emergency meeting was pulled together. Internal Affairs couldn't treat this like a normal complaint because the victim was the head of Internal Affairs himself. That forced the department into a scramble. Another division had to take over the review. Supervisors had to preserve every recording. Dispatch logs had to be locked down. Reports had to be collected before anyone started adjusting their language. And yes, they worried about leaks. They had a reason to. Incidents like this never stay inside one room. First, it spreads through the department, then through city government, then to local media, then online. A patrol officer handcuffing the Internal Affairs chief inside a restaurant is the kind of story that people repeat because it sounds too stupid to be real. But once the footage backs it up, it gets worse every hour. Mercer was pulled from duty almost immediately. Not quietly either. His badge was taken. His firearm was taken. He was placed on emergency administrative suspension pending investigation. That alone said a lot. Departments protect officers all the time when there's room to maneuver. They delay, they soften language, they wait for public pressure. Here they moved fast because the facts were too ugly, and the victim had rank, credibility, and direct knowledge of policy. A lot of officers inside the department saw the message clearly. This wasn't just about one bad detention. This was about what happens when a patrol officer acts like his authority matters more than law, policy, or common sense. Then the deeper review started. Investigators looked at Mercer's prior contacts, complaints, supervisor notes, use of force incidents, stops that escalated faster than they should have. Patterns started showing up. Not always enough for major discipline on their own, but together, they painted a picture. Mercer had a habit of turning routine interactions into control contests. He pushed people when they didn't respond the way he wanted. He relied on command presence where actual legal grounds were thin. He had been warned before, but not hard enough to stop him. That failure landed on the department too. Because when an officer keeps showing the same bad instincts and nobody corrects him, the next disaster is partly organizational. A lot of departments hate admitting that. This one had no choice. Marcus Hale filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against Mercer and the department. That changed the stakes again. Now, the issue wasn't just policy violation. It was unlawful seizure, abuse of authority, and department liability. Hale's legal team had a strong case from the start. They had body cam. They had restaurant footage. They had dispatch records. They had civilian witnesses. They had proof that Hale identified himself early and repeatedly. They had proof Mercer ignored obvious verification steps. They had proof there was no real reasonable suspicion to justify the detention. Mercer's defense tried to hide behind qualified immunity. That didn't hold up well. Qualified immunity usually depends on whether an officer could reasonably believe his conduct was lawful under the circumstances. That's hard to argue when the person in front of you has shown official credentials, identified himself clearly, requested supervisor review, and done nothing threatening. Mercer had too many opportunities to stop. He passed every one of them. That mattered in court. The judge focused on the basic question that destroys a lot of weak police defenses. What exactly was the lawful basis for the detention at the moment force was used? Mercer's side couldn't answer it cleanly. They circled around officer safety language, but judges have seen that move too many times. Courts expect facts, not slogans. And Mercer didn't have the facts. Once it became clear qualified immunity might not save him, settlement pressure went up. Fast. City officials knew a jury would hate the footage. They knew the image problem was bad. They knew the facts made the department look arrogant and sloppy. Worst of all, they knew the plaintiff was not just some random person they could quietly discredit. It was their own internal affairs chief, someone who understood every report, every policy, every inconsistency, and every way the department might try to soften the truth. The city settled. The payout was massive, enough to make headlines, enough to anger taxpayers, enough to force public officials to answer why a routine restaurant check had turned into a civil rights disaster. Hale didn't just get money, he got formal acknowledgement that the detention had no proper basis. That part mattered more than the number. Mercer never recovered professionally. The department moved from suspension to termination after the investigation findings came in. His conduct record, the footage, the failed justification, and the public fallout made it impossible to keep him. He lost the badge for good. In some versions of this kind of case, officers resign before final discipline to save part of their file. Mercer tried to maneuver, but the case was too visible. His name was already attached to the incident. The stain stayed with him. The department also took a hit that lasted longer than his career. City leaders ordered outside review. Civilian oversight powers were expanded. Training was rewritten around detention authority, credential verification, de-escalation, and supervisor notification. Body cam audit rules got tighter. Supervisors were told to flag officers who showed repeated signs of ego-driven escalation before those officers created bigger liability. That's the part that usually gets ignored in smaller stories. Bad policing is not always about one dramatic villain. Sometimes it's about a department seeing a pattern and deciding to live with it until the bill arrives. This time, the bill arrived in public. Marcus Hale came out of it with his credibility stronger than before. Not because he won a power fight, because he stayed disciplined while Mercer lost control. He let the facts do the work. That's why the case held up. That's why the department couldn't spin it. That's why the footage mattered. And that's the lesson here. A badge does not fix a bad decision. Volume does not create legal authority. Ego is not probable cause. An officer can walk into a room thinking he owns it and still walk out as the clearest piece of evidence in a case against himself. What would you have done if you were sitting in that restaurant watching it happen? Have you ever seen someone in authority go too far? Because they couldn't handle being challenged. Put your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories like this.
I said stop arguing and give me your hands.
I already identified myself. Department of Justice, you've seen the credential.
I'm not clearing you off that wallet.
Then verify it.
You don't tell me what to do in this corridor.
I'm telling you the normal
You've been
steps.
non-compliant since I stopped you.
Non-compliant? I answered
More
you.
than
Why
once.
instead of listening?
Can one airport stop destroy a deputy's career before the night is over? That's what this turned into after a county deputy grabbed a federal prosecutor near a secured airport corridor and refused to slow down after official credentials were shown. What should have been a quick check became an assault complaint, a body cam problem, and the start of a career collapse that moved a lot faster than he expected. Comment where you're watching from. And if you follow stories about abuse of power, accountability, and officials who ruin their own careers on camera, like the video and subscribe. The prosecutor in this case was Ethan Cole, a federal attorney with the U.S. Attorney's Office. He handled serious cases, public corruption, multi-state fraud, violent crime. He knew how officers were supposed to verify identity. He also knew how these situations go bad when one officer decides he cares more about obedience than facts. The deputy was Brent Sutter, assigned to airport detail through the county sheriff's office. He knew the terminal. He knew the access lanes. He knew some people in that building had federal clearance and moved through restricted areas as part of their jobs. He also knew the basic rule that keeps scenes like this under control: check first, act second. He ignored that rule. This happened late at night at a major airport. Flights were delayed. Travelers were irritated. Staff were trying to clear people through the building and get off shift. Cole had just returned from a federal meeting and was moving through a restricted corridor used by authorized personnel. He wasn't sneaking anywhere. He wasn't moving fast. He looked like someone who knew where he was going because he did. Sutter saw him and stepped in. At that point, the stop was simple. Ask for identification. Look at it. Confirm access. Move on. Cole gave him the information. That should have ended it. By the time the important body cam footage was reviewed later, Cole had already identified himself more than once. He had already shown Department of Justice credentials. He had already explained why he was in that corridor. Sutter had enough information to pause and verify. He chose not to. That's where the stop changed. It stopped being about airport security. It became a power contest. Cole stayed calm. He kept his hands visible. He repeated the same facts because those were the only facts that mattered. He was a federal prosecutor. He had authorization to be there. His credentials had already been presented. He didn't try to push past the deputy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't act like a man trying to bluff his way through a checkpoint. He acted like a man watching a deputy make a bad decision in public. Sutter didn't like that. Some officers handle correction well, some don't. The bad ones hear basic information and take it personally, and that's what this looked like. The more Cole stayed level, the more Sutter seemed to treat that calm tone like disrespect. People nearby started paying attention. A TSA supervisor slowed down. An airport operations employee looked over from the corridor entrance. A few travelers noticed the deputy's tone and turned their heads. That mattered. Once there's an audience, weak officers often get worse. They don't want to admit they were wrong in front of other people, so they start forcing the situation forward. That's exactly what Sutter did. He moved closer. His tone got sharper. He stopped acting like he was verifying access and started acting like Cole owed him instant surrender. That made no sense. Cole had already answered him, more than once. Sutter had the option to confirm the credential, call a supervisor, or ask airport staff to verify access. Those were normal steps. He skipped all of them. Cole recognized what was happening. He knew he wasn't dealing with confusion anymore. He was dealing with pride. That's a different problem. You can solve confusion with facts. Pride keeps going after the facts are already on the table. So Cole did the smart thing. He stayed measured and kept talking for the record. He repeated his title. He repeated that his credentials had been shown. He made it clear that detaining him without cause would be a serious mistake. He wasn't trying to win an argument. He was making sure the camera and the witnesses heard the same clean timeline. Sutter reacted by escalating. Not because Cole threatened him, not because Cole reached for anything, not because Cole tried to leave. Sutter escalated because he wanted compliance more than clarity. That difference destroyed him later. A lot of bad reports rely on vague words. Suspicious, evasive, non-compliant, officer safety. Those words fall apart when the footage shows something else. In this case, the footage showed a federal prosecutor staying in place, identifying himself, and getting treated like a problem because the deputy couldn't handle being corrected. Sutter stepped in tighter and started giving harder commands. Cole didn't mirror the aggression. He stayed controlled. That probably made Sutter even angrier. Officers like that usually want one of two things: fear or confusion. Cole gave him neither. He gave him facts in a calm voice in front of witnesses. Then Sutter crossed the line. According to the later review, he put his hands on Cole and forced him against a barrier near the corridor entrance. Nothing in the footage suggested an immediate threat. No sudden movement, no aggressive posture, no reason to turn a credential check into physical force. Sutter did it because he had already committed himself to the confrontation and didn't want to back down. That decision ended his career. The body cam didn't show a deputy reacting to danger. It showed a deputy getting physical after he had already been given the information he needed to slow down. That point mattered more than anything he said afterward. Departments can defend a hard stop when the facts support it. They can't do much when the camera shows force driven by ego. Cole understood that right away. He had spent years in and around criminal cases, officer testimony, use of force reviews, and evidence disputes. He knew exactly what this would look like once command staff reviewed the video. He also knew the worst thing he could do was lose control, so he didn't. He kept identifying himself. He kept his movements limited. He kept his words simple. every second made Sutter look worse. And there was plenty of evidence building around him. The deputy's body cam was recording. Airport surveillance covered parts of the area. At least one bystander had started filming on a phone. Staff members heard Cole identify himself more than once. That kind of evidence stack makes cleanup hard. It kills the rewrite before it starts. Sutter still acted like he could force the scene his way. He kept control of the encounter, as if pressure would somehow fix the facts. That's one of the dumbest mistakes an officer can make. The first bad choice creates the problem. The next few choices prove it wasn't an accident. A TSA manager tried to speak up. Sutter pushed past that. Cole kept repeating the same basic facts. Sutter treated those facts like defiance. By then, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deputy ignoring credentials, ignoring context, ignoring witnesses, and using force in a secured airport area against a federal prosecutor. And he had chosen the wrong person to bully. Cole wasn't going to walk away and hope it got forgotten. He knew procedure too well. He knew how evidence preservation worked. He knew how internal investigations were built. Most of all, he knew Sutter's body cam was no longer protecting Sutter. It was documenting the case against him. Then the next person entered the corridor. That changed everything. This wasn't another traveler. It wasn't another deputy ready to back his partner automatically. It was a supervisor who recognized federal credentials on sight and understood almost immediately that Brent Sutter had turned a simple access check into a department-level disaster. The supervisor who stepped into the corridor was Sergeant Dana Ruiz. She saw enough in one glance to know this wasn't a normal access check. Brent Sutter had Ethan Cole pinned near a barrier. Airport staff were watching instead of assisting. Cole had a credential holder in his hand. Nobody on scene looked confused, except the deputy who had started it. Ruiz did what Sutter should have done from the beginning. She slowed the scene down. Cole identified himself again. Same facts, same calm tone. Federal prosecutor, Department of Justice credentials. Authorized access through that corridor. Wrongful detention if this kept going. He wasn't trying to sound dramatic. He was giving a clean record to the first person there who looked willing to listen. Ruiz asked to see the credential. That changed the scene right away. She looked at the ID. Then she looked at Sutter. Then she asked airport staff whether Cole had already explained who he was before force was used. A TSA supervisor confirmed that he had. An airport operations employee backed it up. Sutter tried to take control of the explanation and frame Cole as non-compliant. Ruiz didn't accept that summary at face value. That mattered. A weak supervisor protects the deputy first and asks questions later. Ruiz did the opposite. She went straight to the part that decides cases like this. Did Cole make any threatening movement before Sutter put hands on him? Did he try to run? Did he refuse to identify himself? Did he do anything that turned a credential check into a force situation? The answers were bad for Sutter. Cole had identified himself more than once. He had shown credentials. He had stayed in place. He had not made any move that justified force. Once Ruiz understood that, the whole thing stopped being a gray area dispute. It became what it was from the start, a deputy escalating because he couldn't handle being corrected. She told Sutter to release him fully and step back. That was the first real break in Sutter's control, and everybody around them felt it. Airport staff relaxed a little. Cole adjusted his jacket, secured his credentials, and kept his voice level. No big performance, no emotional outburst. He asked for names, badge numbers, and immediate preservation of body cam and airport surveillance from the corridor area. That was smart. People who know procedure don't waste time with speeches. They lock down evidence. That's what Cole did. He also requested a command-level notification from the sheriff's office and made clear that the incident involved physical force after federal credentials had already been presented. Ruiz understood the problem immediately. Sutter did too, but by then he was trying to survive it, not control it. That's when his story started changing. First, he leaned on the usual words. Suspicious behavior. failure to comply, officer safety concerns, uncertain credentials. Those words sound useful only when they match the footage. Here they didn't. There were too many people who had heard Cole identify himself. There were too many cameras covering the area. And Ruiz had arrived early enough to catch the scene before Sutter could smooth it over. Cole stayed sharp and careful. He didn't insult the deputy. He didn't argue with every excuse. He laid out the sequence in a straight line. He entered a restricted corridor with authorization. He was stopped. He identified himself. He showed Department of Justice credentials. He explained his access. Sutter ignored that and used force anyway. Clear facts beat emotional language every time, especially when the video is backing them up. Airport management started moving fast after that. The TSA supervisor filed an incident account from the airport side. Operations staff identified the nearest surveillance coverage. Ruiz notified her chain of command. Cole contacted his office and made sure the situation was known right away by people who understood exactly how serious it was. Within a short time, federal supervisors and local command staff were both aware that a county deputy at an airport had grabbed a federal prosecutor after verified identification was already on the table. That kind of message spreads very quickly. This is where departments usually hope they can slow things down, frame it as a misunderstanding, and keep the details inside the building. That option died the moment bodycam got pulled. Sutter had not just made a bad decision. He had made it on video, in a secured airport area in front of witnesses who had no reason to help him. His written account made it worse. He tried to justify the force by describing Cole as argumentative and uncooperative. He suggested he wasn't sure the credentials were valid. He implied the situation was still uncertain when he acted. That version didn't hold together once supervisors lined it up against the body cam, the witness statements, and the airport video. The footage showed the problem in plain terms. Cole identified himself early. Cole stayed in place. Cole kept his hands visible. Airport staff tried to clarify what was going on. Sutter talked over them and kept pushing. There was time to verify. That's the part that ruined him. He had options. He ignored them because he wanted submission more than he wanted facts. Internal investigators didn't have to guess. They had a timeline. They had multiple witnesses. They had body cam. They had airport surveillance. They had radio traffic and supervisor response times. Cases like that move faster because there isn't much to argue about. Once the evidence stack gets that strong, the only real question is how much damage the department wants to absorb before acting. The sheriff's office moved quickly. Sutter was pulled from duty almost immediately. His airport assignment ended that night. His access was reviewed. His weapon status and reporting requirements changed while the investigation was active. That's a fast fall for a deputy who probably thought he still had room to explain it away. He didn't. By the next stage of review, command staff had already seen enough. The force was not justified. The credential issue had been clear much earlier than Sutter claimed. His written explanation did not match the video in key places. That combination is deadly in law enforcement. Bad judgment is one thing. Bad judgment plus a misleading report is how careers really end. And that's exactly what happened. Sutter was fired, not transferred, not quietly reassigned. Fired. The internal finding focused on unjustified force, failure to follow verification procedure, and dishonesty in reporting the encounter. Once those findings were attached to his name, the damage went past one job. State certification review followed, which meant his ability to work as a sworn officer anywhere else was suddenly in danger too. That part hits harder than people realize. A deputy doesn't just lose a paycheck in a case like this. He loses credibility. Other agencies see the file. Hiring boards see the finding. Certification boards see the body cam. The badge doesn't travel well after that. One arrogant airport stop turned into a record that would follow him everywhere. The fallout didn't stop with him. The sheriff's office had to answer for why an airport detail deputy ignored federal credentials and escalated anyway. That triggered retraining. Credential recognition protocols were reviewed. Supervisors had to go over use of force thresholds, coordination with federal personnel, and basic verification steps for restricted access areas. Nobody in that department got to treat it like one man's private mistake, because one man's private mistake had become a department embarrassment. Cole came out of it vindicated, but not untouched. He still got shoved in public. He still had to spend time preserving evidence, giving statements, and making sure the facts didn't get softened into bureaucratic nonsense. That's the part people skip when they talk about accountability. Getting justice after abuse of power still takes work from the person who got targeted. The difference here is that Cole knew exactly how the system worked and refused to let Sutter write the first version of reality. That made all the difference. A less informed person might have gone home angry and hoped someone higher up would sort it out. Cole didn't do that. He stayed controlled. He spoke for the record. He locked down the evidence. He made the chain of command deal with the truth while the scene was still fresh. That is how you beat a bad badge. Not with panic, not with louder yelling, with facts, timing, and discipline. That's the lesson in this story. Brent Sutter didn't lose his career because of confusion. He lost it because his ego took over after the facts were already in front of him. He treated authority like ownership. He acted like the badge meant he got to decide what was true. The body cam took that away from him. The supervisor finished the rest. Then the department did what it had to do once the evidence became impossible to defend. So what would you have done in Ethan Cole's position? Would you have kept talking for the record, or would you have gone quiet and waited for a supervisor? Put it in the comments. Share this story with someone who follows cases like this. And subscribe for more stories about abuse of power, accountability, and the exact moment a career falls apart on camera.
Turn around, hands behind your back.
Why? I gave you my ID. That's my family's car.
It came back stolen. Turn around.
Then check it again. Please, you've got the registration right there.
Turn around.
I'm telling you there's a mistake.
You can explain that after.
What? After you cuffed me over a bad plate hit? My father is dead.
A dispatcher entered one wrong digit, and that mistake turned a routine park check into an unlawful arrest. This breakdown follows the body cam footage from the first approach to the moment the stop started falling apart. It showed how a bad plate return, officer bias, and simple refusal to verify basic facts pushed a normal contact into a serious rights violation. This was the point where department confidence ran ahead of the facts. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. And if you follow stories about police accountability, bad stops, and body cam breakdowns, like the video and subscribe. That helps the channel keep covering cases like this. The young man in the car was Caleb Turner, 21 years old, college student, no threat, no aggressive moves. He was parked at a city park in the early evening, waiting before heading home. The car belonged to his family. His father, Daniel Turner, had just been named the city's new police chief. The officers on patrol didn't know that when they first drove through the lot. At the start, this looked ordinary. Two officers rolled through the park during a routine patrol. They checked parked cars, looked around the trail entrance, and ran plates the way patrol units often do when they want to show presence and maybe find something minor before the shift ends. One officer ran Caleb's plate. Dispatch came back with a stolen vehicle hit. That changed the stop in seconds. The body cam showed it clearly. The officers walked up calm, then tightened up as soon as they heard the return. Their tone got sharper. Their posture changed. One moved into command mode. The other started watching Caleb like he expected trouble. That reaction is the first thing that stood out on the footage. They treated the computer return like final proof, not the start of a check. That's where the stop started going bad. Caleb stayed seated and answered questions. He explained that the car belonged to his family. He gave his ID. He told them why he was at the park. His answers stayed steady. He didn't act like someone trying to hide anything. The officers didn't adjust to that at all. They kept pushing from the assumption that the car had to be stolen. Every answer Caleb gave went through that filter. If he stayed calm, they read it as rehearsed. If he explained too much, they read it as suspicious. Once they decided the screen was right, they stopped testing whether the screen could be wrong. That's the real issue in stops like this. Not just the error, the mindset after the error. A stolen plate return should trigger verification. It should not end the thinking process. Officers still have to match the information to the car, the driver, the registration, and the actual situation in front of them. They still have to ask whether the facts line up. These officers didn't do that. Caleb told them the vehicle was not stolen. He said there had to be a mistake. Then he gave them one more piece of information. He said his father was the new chief. That should have led to a pause. Instead, it made the officers more dismissive. The body cam didn't need dramatic lines to make that obvious. You could hear it in the way they handled him after that. They treated the claim like a bluff, not something to verify, not something to note and pass up the chain. Just a reason to dig in harder. Bad sign. Because even if they thought he was lying, the next steps were still simple. Check the registration, confirm the VIN, rerun the plate carefully, ask dispatch to verify the stolen entry, call a supervisor early if needed. None of that would have taken much, and all of it mattered, because once officers move from detention into force and cuffs, they need more than blind trust in a database entry. They didn't slow down. They ordered Caleb out of the car. He complied. That part matters because departments always like to blur the line later. They'll say the subject was uncooperative when what they really mean is he didn't instantly agree with their conclusion. The footage here showed no resistance. Caleb got out, tried to keep explaining, and asked them to check again. They pulled him away from the car and put him in handcuffs. That was the point where this became more than a bad stop. At that moment, the officers had a calm driver, identifying information, no resistance, no attempt to flee, and a vehicle right there for verification. They still had not confirmed the VIN before putting cuffs on him. That's a major problem. Vehicle stops built on stolen returns are supposed to involve confirmation. Plate errors happen. Data entry mistakes happen. Similar plates happen. Stale records happen. Every officer knows that, or should. The plate hit is one piece of information. It's not magic. It does not remove the duty to verify. The body cam made that failure hard to defend. Caleb stood cuffed near the car, while people nearby started noticing the stop. He asked for a supervisor. Smart move. He understood that the officers on scene had already committed themselves to the wrong story. That request went nowhere. The officers kept control of the scene, but they were no longer thinking clearly. They were defending their decision. You could hear it in the way they repeated the same suspicion instead of checking the missing facts. They had moved past investigation. Now they were protecting their own certainty. That's usually when departments get into real trouble. Once an officer starts worrying more about being contradicted than being wrong, the stop gets worse fast. Caleb kept telling them the vehicle belonged to his family. He kept asking them to verify it properly. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't making threats. He was trying to get them to do basic police work. They still didn't check the one thing that could settle it fast. The VIN sat on the vehicle. The registration trail was available. Dispatch could have confirmed the exact entry tied to the stolen report. The officers had options. They chose force first and accuracy second. That choice is what made the body cam footage so damaging later. Not because the scene looked chaotic, because it didn't. It looked controlled, clean, official, and still wrong. That's how people get trapped by bad policing. Not always through wild violence. Sometimes through calm, organized mistakes, backed by badges and routine language. Then the first sign of trouble hit the radio. Dispatch came back with a less certain tone. One of the officers paused and listened. Not long. Just enough for the body cam to catch a change. The confidence on scene had started to crack, even if they hadn't admitted it yet. Back at dispatch, someone was taking a second look at the stolen vehicle entry. The problem was simple. The stolen plate report had been entered for a nearly identical tag. One digit off. and that one digit was about to expose the whole stop. The stop started breaking down the moment a supervisor got involved. A field sergeant, Monica Hale, pulled into the lot after Caleb kept asking for one. By then, he was already in cuffs beside the car, and the two patrol officers had settled into that familiar position officers take when they think the case is already done. They gave her the short version first. Stolen vehicle hit. Driver claimed the car was his. Then he claimed his father was the new chief. That last detail got her attention. Not because she believed it on the spot, because it was specific. Specific claims get checked. They don't get ignored. She looked at Caleb, asked for his full name, then looked back at the officers. The body cam showed the first real pause in the whole scene. Up to that point, nobody on scene had acted like the stop needed fresh review. Hale did. That changed the pace. She asked the basic questions that should have been asked earlier. Had they confirmed the VIN? Had dispatch read back the full stolen entry? Did the registration match the car? Had the driver shown ID? None of those questions should have come that late. But they did. The answers weren't good. Caleb had shown ID. The registration issue hadn't been fully resolved on scene. The VIN had not been confirmed before he was cuffed. The officers were still leaning almost entirely on the initial plate return. That's weak police work, no nice way to say it. A stolen hit can justify caution. It does not justify skipping verification. Once Hale realized they had taken a compliant driver out of a car and cuffed him without confirming the vehicle itself, she stopped treating the stop like a normal patrol arrest and started treating it like a possible department mistake. She got on the radio and asked dispatch to verify everything again. Full plate, state, vehicle description, entry source. This time, the radio traffic sounded different. Not clean, not confident. Short pauses. Repeated numbers. One dispatcher speaking, then stopping, then correcting herself. The officers on scene heard it too. You could see it in the way they stopped moving around and started listening harder. That was the turning point. Back at dispatch, the original stolen entry was being reviewed line by line. The plate attached to the stolen report looked almost identical to Caleb's plate. Same letters, same pattern. One digit was different. That single digit had been entered wrong during an earlier call, and nobody caught it before it went live in the system. So the officers had been working off a false hit the whole time. Hale asked dispatch to read both plates again. Slowly. They did. That ended it. The stolen entry belonged to another vehicle. Not Caleb's, not that car, not that stop. Everything the patrol officers had built the detention around collapsed right there over the radio. The body cam caught the shift immediately. The officers who had been certain a few minutes earlier stopped talking the same way. The tone changed first, then the posture. They were no longer managing a stolen vehicle arrest. They were standing in a park with a handcuffed college student they had no legal basis to hold. And it got worse for them fast. Hale asked one more question. She asked for Caleb's father's full name. He gave it. Daniel Turner, the new chief. Now the scene had two separate failures attached to it. First, the false stolen hit. Second, the fact that the officers had ignored a claim they could have checked early, then escalated before verifying anything that mattered. Hale didn't waste time. She ordered the cuffs off. That part of the footage mattered because it showed how simple the correction could have been if anyone had used judgment earlier. Caleb had been detained, removed, and cuffed over a data entry mistake and officer pride. Then one supervisor asked the right questions and the whole case ended in under 2 minutes. That tells you everything. Caleb got his hands free, but the damage was already done. He had been publicly cuffed in a park, treated like a thief, and dismissed every time he tried to correct them. The officers started giving him the usual cleanup language. They said there had been confusion. They said they were following the return. They acted like this was an unfortunate mix-up instead of a chain of bad decisions. It wasn't just a mix-up. The dispatcher made the first mistake. The officers made the stop worse. That distinction matters. A clerical error can happen. The unlawful detention came from human choices after the error. Hale seemed to understand that. She pulled the officers aside and started asking questions away from Caleb in the car. The body cam couldn't catch every word, but it caught enough. She wanted to know why the VIN hadn't been checked, why the detention moved so fast, why nobody slowed down once the driver gave ID and made a verifiable claim. They didn't have strong answers. By then, Caleb was standing near his car, working through the anger in a controlled way. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't putting on a show. He was focused. He asked for names, badge numbers, supervisor information. He knew this had gone past apology territory. He was right, because now the call had moved beyond the park. The error had been confirmed. The chief had been notified. And inside the department, people were already figuring out that the new administration's first internal crisis had just arrived through a body cam file. Once the chief was notified, the incident stopped being a bad park arrest and became a department problem. Chief Daniel Turner didn't rush in yelling. That would have made it personal too fast, and he knew it. He handled it as both a father and the head of the department. That mattered because every move after that had to survive review. Internal, legal, public. By the time he got the first briefing, the basic facts were already clear. His son, Caleb Turner, had been detained in handcuffs during a park stop because dispatch attached a stolen vehicle entry to the wrong plate. The patrol officers had relied on that return, ignored signs that the stop didn't add up, and failed to confirm the VIN before escalating. That last part stood out. The dispatch error explained the stop. It did not excuse the detention. Inside the department, people started separating those two failures right away. One was clerical. The other was operational. The clerical mistake came from one wrong digit. The operational failure came from officers choosing speed over verification and then refusing to slow down once the stop started looking weak. That distinction shaped everything that followed. The chief ordered immediate preservation of all body cam footage, radio traffic, CAD logs, dispatch entries, and supervisor notes. No gaps, no selective review. He wanted the full timeline locked down before anyone started rewriting their memory of the stop. Smart move. That's how you stop the usual cleanup process before it starts. Then he removed the case from casual internal handling and kicked it into formal review. The patrol officers were pulled off regular duty pending that review, not fired on the spot, not publicly defended either, just moved out of the field while command staff examined the stop step by step. That was the first signal that this administration wasn't going to wave it off as a harmless mistake. Dispatch got reviewed too. The communications center had to answer for how the stolen entry got attached to the wrong plate and why the error stayed active long enough to trigger a felony-style stop. The dispatcher involved, Angela Ross, had not invented the plate out of nowhere. She had entered it during a heavy shift with multiple open calls. That explained how it happened. It did not solve the control problem. A system that lets one wrong digit sit unverified in a high-risk category has its own weakness. That's what made this bigger than one bad officer and one bad entry. The department had a chain failure. Dispatch entered the wrong plate. Patrol trusted the return without testing it. The officers skipped a basic vehicle check. The detention continued even after Caleb identified himself and asked for a supervisor. The scene corrected only when Sergeant Hale arrived and started asking simple questions. That's not one mistake. That's a full system passing bad information forward. Caleb gave a formal statement that same night. He kept it controlled. He described the stop, the handcuffing, the requests he made, and the officer's refusal to verify the car before treating him like a suspect. He didn't need to exaggerate anything. The footage already did the work. That footage became the department's biggest problem. Not because it showed some huge violent scene, because it showed something harder to defend. Calm error, confident error, professional sounding error, the kind that looks normal to people inside the system until someone outside the system asks one direct question. Why didn't they verify the car before cuffing him? No clean answer existed. The chief released a short public statement after the first review meeting. He confirmed that his son had been wrongfully detained during a traffic-related stop tied to an inaccurate stolen vehicle entry. He said the department would review both dispatch procedures and patrol verification standards. He also made one point very clearly. No resident should need a connection to command staff to get basic facts checked before force is used. That line landed, because everybody understood what sat underneath it. Caleb got fast attention once his last name registered with the right supervisor. Most people don't get that. Most people stay in cuffs longer. Some get booked. Some get charges dropped later and are told the system worked because the mistake was fixed in the end. That's not the system working. That's the system cleaning up after itself. City officials picked up on the case almost immediately. The mayor's office wanted a briefing. The city manager wanted to know whether exposure existed for a civil claim. The legal division started looking at unlawful detention, policy compliance, and whether training records would make the city look worse if the case went public. They had reason to worry. The policy issues were direct. Officers were expected to confirm vehicle identifiers when possible before making an arrest based on a database return. Supervisory review was supposed to matter once a subject gave verifiable information that conflicted with the initial hit. The footage raised questions on both points. The officers had options. They didn't use them. The union got involved too. Predictable. It framed the stop as a good faith reliance issue. That argument only went so far. Good faith weakens fast when basic confirmation steps are skipped. The city knew that. Command knew it. The body cam made it hard to hide. Within days, the department had opened 3 separate tracks. Internal Affairs reviewed officer conduct. Communications supervisors reviewed dispatch practices. Command staff reviewed training on stolen vehicle stops, field verification, and supervisor intervention. That's when the story stopped being private. Word spread inside the department first, then outside it. Officers talked, dispatchers talked. Somebody mentioned the chief's son. Somebody else mentioned body cam. By the end of the week, the incident had moved from internal embarrassment to community conversation. And once that happened, the department lost control of the narrative. People started asking the obvious question. If this happened to the chief's son in a city park, with ID, with no resistance, and with a supervisor eventually recognizing the name, what happened to everyone else who didn't have that protection? That question stuck. It also put pressure on the chief. He couldn't treat Caleb like a special victim. He had to treat him like what he actually was in this case. Proof that the system could fail anybody. So he did the harder thing. He let the review keep moving. The review kept moving because it had to. Once command staff finished the first pass through the footage, the department could no longer treat the arrest as a simple park stop mistake. The facts were too plain. Caleb Turner had been detained in handcuffs on a false stolen vehicle hit. The plate return was wrong. The VIN was not checked before the detention. A supervisor had to step in before the stop got corrected. That's not a close call. That's failure. Internal Affairs sustained the main complaints against the 2 patrol officers, not because they ran the plate. That part was normal. They got hit for what happened after the return came back. They escalated without confirming the vehicle. They ignored conflicting information from the driver. They kept the detention going after clear signs that the stop needed verification, not force. The penalties reflected that. The lead officer lost street duty and took a suspension. The second officer was suspended too and sent back through remedial training on vehicle stop verification, detention standards, and supervisor escalation. The department didn't try to sell that as strong enough to fix everything. It wasn't, but it put something on the record. The stop violated policy. Dispatch faced consequences too. Angela Ross, the dispatcher tied to the wrong entry, was placed under formal review and removed from high-risk call coding until retraining was complete. That part was awkward because everybody inside the building knew dispatchers work under pressure and make fast entries all shift long. Still, pressure doesn't erase accountability. A stolen vehicle entry carries enough risk that one digit can wreck somebody's night or worse. That brought the department to the bigger problem. The real issue wasn't only the typo, it was the lack of safeguards around the typo. One wrong digit should not move untouched from the communications center to a field detention without somebody checking it against the actual vehicle. That was the hole this case exposed. The department's own process let bad information travel too far. So the chief used the case to force changes. New verification rules were issued for stolen vehicle stops. Patrol officers now had to confirm a second vehicle identifier when conditions allowed. VIN first if possible. Registration match if available. Vehicle description from the return had to be compared out loud on the radio in higher-risk stops. Supervisors had to respond earlier when a detained driver gave specific conflicting information. Dispatch got a second check requirement on manually entered stolen plates before the hit stayed active in the system. Basic reforms, nothing fancy. The kind that should have already been there. The city also brought in an outside review of dispatch and patrol coordination. That mattered because internal fixes sound nice, until an outside set of eyes checks whether the department is protecting the public or just protecting itself. The outside review found what you'd expect. Weak cross-checking, too much trust in computer returns, not enough emphasis on slow verification. Once officers had a compliant driver in a stationary vehicle, Caleb never became the loud public face of the incident. That's another reason the story hit hard. He didn't turn it into a performance. He gave a statement. He met with city attorneys. He let the footage and the facts speak. Later, through counsel, he filed a claim against the city for unlawful detention. The city settled before dragging it into a longer court fight. Also predictable. The body cam hurt them. The radio traffic hurt them. The missed VIN check hurt them most of all. A jury would have understood that point in 5 minutes. Chief Turner kept his public comments controlled. He refused to frame the case as a family matter. Smart again. He kept returning to the same point. His son got out of the situation faster because the right supervisor recognized the name. Most people do not have that advantage. That was the only honest way to talk about it. And that's the part that stayed with people. This story was never only about the chief's son. He just happened to be the one in the cuffs that night. The real story was what the footage showed about the system. A dispatcher made one clerical mistake. 2 officers treated that mistake like proof. They ignored the person in front of them. They skipped the check that could have prevented the arrest. Then, the whole thing got corrected only after rank stepped in. That can happen to anybody. A lot of people watched this case and focused on the embarrassment. New chief, wrongful arrest, his own son, easy headline. That wasn't the important part. The important part was how ordinary the failure looked until it collapsed. No wild chase, no fight, no dramatic chaos. Just routine procedure done badly by people too certain they were right. That's why these videos matter. They show how bad policing often works in real life, not always through explosions. Sometimes through paperwork, tone, assumptions, and officers who stop thinking once the screen gives them a result. That's what made this case bigger than one bad stop in a park. It exposed how thin the line can be between normal patrol work and an unlawful detention when nobody slows down to verify. Caleb moved on. The department didn't get to move on as easily. The incident stayed in training. Supervisors referenced it. Dispatch referenced it. Officers heard about it every time stolen vehicle procedure came up. That was the one useful thing that came out of it. The case became an example inside the building, not just outside it. It should have, because the lesson wasn't complicated. A database can be wrong. A dispatcher can mistype one digit. An officer can lock onto the wrong conclusion. Every one of those things can happen. The test is whether somebody in the chain still does the basic work and checks the facts before taking somebody's freedom. In this case, they didn't. Not until it was too late. So that's the story. A routine patrol, one bad entry, two officers who trusted the screen more than the situation, a supervisor who finally asked the right questions, and a department forced to admit that the stop never should have happened. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What should the officers have done the moment Caleb gave ID and said the car was his? Have you ever seen a case where a simple verification step would have changed everything? Share this with somebody who follows body cam breakdowns and police accountability stories. And subscribe if you want more real cases told straight.
These could be fake.
They're not fake. Call it in.
You expect me to just take this at face value?
No. I expect you to verify it.
Why are you out here in an unmarked car?
Federal field work.
I already told you that. That's convenient.
No, it's consistent.
Sheriff, we should verify first.
I know what I'm doing.
Sheriff Grant Hollis believed he had stopped a man using fake federal credentials to dodge a roadside search. The facts were the exact opposite. The driver was Special Agent Adrian Cross, a real federal investigator, and Hollis put him in cuffs after looking at valid ID. That mistake didn't stay a mistake for long. It turned into an internal affairs case, then a federal prosecution, and by the end of it, Hollis was the one standing in court hearing a prison sentence tied to his own abuse of power. Drop your state or country in the comments. And if you like stories where recorded facts destroy official lies, like the video and subscribe. This case is a perfect example of how one bad decision can pull an entire department into a federal mess. Now, back to the road where it started. Grant Hollis had spent years building a department around himself. 11 years as sheriff, 2 election wins, total control over a small county office. People under him knew how he operated. He pushed stops hard, expected instant compliance, and treated disagreement as a challenge to his authority. That kind of command style creates its own problem. Deputies stop slowing things down when they should. They start reading the boss instead of reading the law. Adrian Cross was finishing fieldwork on a federal corruption case that touched local contractors and public money. Plainclothes, unmarked sedan, no marked unit, no raid jacket, no reason to stand out. He was leaving the area after a routine part of the job and heading back to file reports. Just after dark, Hollis saw Cross's sedan on a county road near an area where local patrol units had been active. Later, Hollis gave more than one reason for the stop. First, he said the car looked suspicious. Then he added hesitation at an intersection. Later, he mentioned a lane issue. Investigators would compare those explanations against the footage and the timing. They didn't line up well. But in the moment, Hollis made the stop and committed himself to it. Cross pulled over without delay. Nothing about the stop suggested a threat. The car came to a proper stop on the shoulder. Cross stayed inside and kept his hands visible. Hollis still walked up with the attitude of a man who had already decided he was dealing with trouble. Deputy Aaron Shaw arrived first. Deputy Mason Kerr came in right behind her. With backup on scene, Hollis had what mattered most to him in moments like this: witnesses from his own office. Cross identified himself as federal law enforcement early in the encounter. He explained that he had credentials and said where they were located. He was giving Hollis a clear way to verify identity before doing anything reckless. Hollis ignored the off-ramp. He ordered Cross out of the sedan, searched him, and recovered the credentials himself. That should have slowed the stop down. A careful officer would have checked the ID through dispatch, contacted a federal supervisor, and sorted it out before escalating. Hollis went the other direction. He looked at the credentials and treated them as part of the problem instead of the answer. From there, the stop got worse fast. Cross repeated his name and agency. He kept telling Hollis to verify the identification before making a bigger mistake. Shaw was already reading the scene differently than Kerr. She wasn't siding with the driver, and she was doing her job and noticing that the legal basis for the stop was getting weaker not stronger. Kerr followed Hollis and acted like they were dealing with a fraud case. Hollis started stacking excuses. He said the credentials might be fake. He said Cross wasn't following commands quickly enough. He framed the situation as obstruction. None of that changed the basic problem. He had no clear crime and no immediate threat. But he kept pushing because backing off in front of his deputies would have felt like losing control. Then he handcuffed him. That was the point where the case changed shape. A rough traffic stop can still be defended as bad judgment. Cuffing a federal agent after reviewing valid credentials creates a much harder question. Was this confusion, or was this an officer using his badge to force a false version of events? Cross stayed controlled. That helped him later. He didn't turn it into a roadside argument. He didn't get loud. He kept identifying himself and asking for verification. When Hollis later tried to describe him as evasive and difficult, the body cam footage undercut that claim. Shaw raised the issue of verification. She did it carefully because she knew who she was talking to. Hollis shut her down in front of Kerr and ordered transport to county booking. That decision made the exposure much worse. Once Hollis sent Cross to booking, the event stopped being just a bad stop on the side of a road. From that point on, every record mattered. The body cam footage mattered. The dash cam mattered. Dispatch audio mattered. The booking desk cameras mattered. The arrest report mattered. So did the timeline, minute by minute. On the drive to the station, Cross again requested contact with a supervisor or federal liaison. Hollis didn't help him. Kerr backed the sheriff's version. Shaw said little, but by then she already knew the office was heading into dangerous territory. The booking area created the first real crack in Hollis's control. Jail staff had seen fake IDs before. Cross didn't present like someone bluffing under pressure. He gave exact agency information, stayed consistent, and answered every question directly. Staff checked the credentials, then looked back at Hollis. That shift in attention said a lot. The uncertainty was no longer centered on the man in cuffs. It was centered on the sheriff who brought him in. Hollis still forced the process forward. He told staff to continue while verification was pending. Then he began shaping the arrest paperwork around the outcome he wanted. That move became a major issue later. Investigators would argue that he wasn't documenting facts as they developed. He was trying to build cover after the arrest had already gone bad. Outside the sheriff's office, the situation was moving out of local hands. Calls were starting to reach federal supervisors. Agency channels were waking up. The message was simple and damaging. A county sheriff had detained and booked a federal agent after being shown credentials. Hollis still thought the station was his ground and the paperwork would protect him. He was wrong. Because once federal officials started calling back, this stopped being a county matter. It became a question of unlawful detention, civil rights violations, false reporting, and whether a sheriff had used his office to punish a man for not submitting to a bad stop. The first serious problem hit the booking desk before any outside supervisor walked through the door. A jail sergeant took Cross's credentials, checked the badge wallet, and asked for agency contact information. Cross gave it without hesitation. Same agency, same office, same identifying details he had already given on the roadside. Everything stayed consistent. That's what started moving people away from Hollis's version. A liar usually adjusts. Cross didn't need to. Hollis still tried to control the room. He told staff to finish intake and hold Cross while his office sorted it out. That sounds ordinary until you look at what he actually had at that point. No confirmed fake ID. No solid traffic offense supporting a custodial arrest. No violent conduct. No probable cause for some hidden crime that would justify treating a federal credential as a prop. He had a stop that got out of hand and a booking process that was making it worse. Deputy Erin Shaw saw it clearly by then. She wasn't making speeches. She didn't need to. She watched the jail sergeant look longer at the credentials than at the booking form. She saw dispatch ask for clarification twice because the charge language coming from Hollis and Kerr didn't stay consistent. First, it leaned on obstruction, then failure to comply, then concern about false identification. Same event, different labels. That's a bad sign in any case. In a case involving a federal agent, it's a disaster. Mason Kerr stayed with Hollis. That choice made sense in the moment. Hollis was still sheriff. Kerr was still a deputy in his chain of command. Small departments work like that. A bad order doesn't always get challenged when it should. People think about promotions, schedules, transfers, discipline. They think about tomorrow morning. They don't always think about federal court 6 months later. Cross asked again for contact with a federal supervisor. This time the request didn't die in the room. The jail sergeant made the call through official channels. He didn't ask Hollis for permission. He did what any competent booking officer would do when presented with credentials that looked real in an arrest that didn't make sense. That call broke the sheriff's control over the situation. Within minutes, the response from the federal side changed the pace of everything. The first person reached wasn't some random desk clerk. It was a supervisory contact who recognized Cross's name immediately. That person asked basic verification questions. Badge number, office assignment, approximate stop location, booking time. The answers matched. Then came the follow-up that put the whole room on edge. The federal office wanted to know why one of its agents was in county custody at all. Nobody in booking had a clean answer. Hollis tried to step in and frame it as an officer safety stop involving suspicious behavior and questionable credentials. That didn't help him. He was now talking to people who knew exactly how federal credentials looked, how agents carried them, and how roadside verification should work. His version no longer sounded tough. It sounded sloppy. That was the moment the station started turning against him. Not openly, not yet. But people stopped moving with his usual confidence. The jail sergeant slowed intake. Shaw stopped treating the paperwork like routine processing and started reading every line. Even Kerr got quieter once he understood the federal office wasn't confused about Cross's identity. They were confused about why the sheriff thought he could ignore it. The next mistake came from Hollis trying to protect the first one. Instead of releasing Cross immediately and documenting the stop as a verification failure, he leaned into the arrest report. He wanted the language tightened up. He wanted the stop to look more justified on paper than it had looked on video. He pushed the idea that Cross had created the confusion by not complying quickly enough. That argument had a simple problem. The footage already existed, and the footage didn't support it. Shaw knew exactly what that meant. A bad arrest can end one career. Bad video plus bad paperwork can end several. She pulled Kerr aside and asked whether he was really going to sign off on a report that might not survive a basic review. Kerr didn't have a good answer. He still wasn't ready to break from Hollis, but the confidence was gone. He had been acting like backup on a fraud stop. Now he was standing in a county jail while federal supervisors demanded an explanation for why their agent had been booked. Cross remained in custody during all of this, and that part became crucial later. Time matters in detention cases. Every extra minute after identity is confirmed raises the stakes. Once the federal office verified him, the legal risk jumped. From that point, the question wasn't whether Hollis had made a mistake. The question was why he kept going after the mistake became obvious. A federal supervisor arrived at the station faster than Hollis expected. He came with calm authority, not drama. That made it worse. No yelling, no threats. Just direct questions, immediate recognition of Cross's credentials, and a request for the full basis of arrest. Hollis didn't have one that held up. He had fragments, suspicion, non-compliance, concern about fake ID. None of it worked together. That was the real shift. People in the building saw the same thing at the same time. Cross was exactly who he said he was. Hollis had been wrong at the roadside, then wrong at booking, then wrong again when he tried to hold the line instead of fixing it. The room didn't need a speech. The facts had already done the job. Cross was released, but by then the damage was done. Release didn't clean it up. Release proved he never should have been booked in the first place. Before the night ended, the federal office requested preservation of body cam footage, dash cam footage, booking video, dispatch logs, and all arrest paperwork. That request alone told the department this wasn't staying informal. Hollis had moved past embarrassment and into investigation territory, and internal affairs hadn't even started yet. By the next morning, this had moved out of normal chain of command damage control. Internal affairs opened a formal investigation because the arrest had collapsed on basic verification. That point mattered. Adrian Cross wasn't released because somebody did him a favor. He was released because the sheriff's office could no longer defend holding him. Investigators started with the recordings. They collected Grant Hollis's body camera, Aaron Shaw's body camera, Mason Kerr's body camera, dash camera footage, booking desk video, hallway video, dispatch audio, computer logs, call records, and every version of the arrest paperwork. Then they built the timeline minute by minute. That timeline killed Hollis's story. Cross identified himself early on the roadside. Hollis recovered federal credentials during the stop. Shaw raised the need to verify before transport. Booking staff slowed down once they looked at the credentials. A federal supervisor confirmed Cross's identity while he was still in custody. Even after that, Hollis didn't fix the arrest right away. That sequence became the center of the case. Internal Affairs wasn't dealing with one bad judgment call. They were looking at a series of choices, each one worse than the last. Hollis had chances to stop. He didn't take them. Then he tried to make the paperwork support decisions that already looked weak on video. His first interview with Internal Affairs made things worse. He said Cross acted evasive. The footage didn't show that. He said the credentials looked suspicious. Booking staff didn't treat them that way. He said he needed more time to verify identity. The call records showed that the federal office had already confirmed who Cross was before the detention ended. That changed the investigation. At first, Internal Affairs was reviewing arrest procedure and policy violations. After that interview, the focus widened. Now, investigators were looking at honesty, report language, and whether Hollis had tried to create cover after the fact. Then, they pulled prior complaints. Not every complaint against Hollis had been sustained. That's normal in law enforcement cases. Still, several looked familiar once investigators compared them side by side. Aggressive stop, weak legal basis, escalation after challenge, charges changing during the report process, deputies feeling pressure to support the sheriff's version. Cross's arrest no longer looked isolated. It looked like the worst version of an old pattern. Erin Shaw became one of the most important witnesses in the building. She told Internal Affairs exactly what happened. No big speech, no trying to make herself the hero. She said Cross identified himself early. She said Hollis had the credentials in hand before transport. She said she raised verification concerns and got shut down. That made her hard to attack. Her account matched the footage, the timing, and the booking records. Mason Kerr held out longer. At first, he backed Hollis. He described the stop as a reasonable fraud concern and tried to keep the arrest inside that frame. Internal Affairs pushed back with timestamps, dispatch traffic, and video from booking. Kerr's position got weaker every time they showed him another record. He finally admitted Hollis kept changing the reason for the stop. He also admitted the report language was being adjusted after the arrest had already started falling apart. That admission changed everything. Once a deputy says the report was shaped to justify the arrest, the case stops being only about bad policing. Now it's about false documentation, abuse of authority, and whether the sheriff used his office to turn a personal mistake into an official lie. The county saw the danger by then. Hollis was placed on administrative leave. Publicly, the county said it needed a full review. Internally, people were protecting themselves. Command staff didn't want their names attached to the arrest. The county attorney didn't want to defend a case built on shifting explanations and bad footage. Even deputies who had kept quiet under Hollis started speaking more carefully because they knew the recordings were stronger than any internal loyalty. The federal side was already moving. Cross's agency made a formal referral. The Department of Justice reviewed the stop, the detention, the booking, and the reporting. From that point on, Hollis had two problems. Internal Affairs was building the administrative case. Federal prosecutors were deciding whether his conduct crossed into criminal territory. It did. The legal theory came together from the evidence, not from politics. Hollis had detained a federal agent without a solid basis, ignored valid credentials, kept the detention going after identity was confirmed, and tried to support the arrest with changing explanations. Prosecutors didn't need a dramatic conspiracy. They had body camera footage, dispatch records, booking video, staff testimony, and a clean timeline. That's the kind of case officers fear most. No guesswork, no messy witness memory, just records. By the time the federal indictment was being prepared, Hollis still acted like he could survive it the same way he had survived complaints in his own county. He was badly misreading the situation. County politics can bury a grievance. They can't erase federal evidence. And once the indictment came down, the story changed again. It wasn't about whether Hollis had gone too far in a traffic stop. It was about whether a sheriff had used his badge, his office, and his subordinates to carry out an unlawful detention and then hide it behind official paperwork. The federal indictment ended the political part of the story. Grant Hollis was charged with violating civil rights under color of law, unlawful detention, obstruction, and false statements tied to the arrest and report. His defense tried to frame the stop as a fast-moving judgment call. That argument didn't hold up because the evidence showed repeated chances to correct it. At trial, the prosecution stayed simple. Adrian Cross testified that he identified himself early, presented valid credentials, and kept asking for verification. Erin Shaw backed the timeline and confirmed she raised concerns before transport. Mason Kerr did the most damage. He admitted Hollis kept changing the reason for the stop and pushed to shape the paperwork after the arrest had already gone bad. The recordings finished the job. Body camera footage showed Cross staying controlled. Dispatch records showed federal identity was confirmed while he was still being held. Booking video showed staff losing confidence in Hollis's version before the release. Once jurors saw the timeline in order, the defense lost ground fast. Hollis tried leaning on authority and officer judgment. The court didn't buy it. Qualified immunity didn't save him because this was not a close call. The judge made that clear. A sheriff had no right to ignore valid credentials, hold a man without a lawful basis, and then force the paperwork to fit the arrest. The jury convicted him. At sentencing, the judge focused on abuse of trust. Hollis wasn't punished for making one mistake on a dark road. He was punished because he kept going after the truth was in front of him. He received a federal prison sentence, lost his office, and left the courthouse as a convicted former sheriff instead of the most powerful man in his county. The fallout didn't stop with him. The county changed arrest review procedures, required outside review for interagency detention cases, expanded body camera retention rules, and tightened reporting oversight. Deputies who had stayed quiet under Hollis now had a case everyone pointed to when talking about what happens when rank goes unchecked. That's the whole point of this story. Grant Hollis thought his badge gave him the final word. It didn't. Facts did. Video did. Paperwork did. And once all of it was lined up, his own office couldn't protect him from what he had done. Tell me what you think. Would you have trusted the sheriff's version before the footage came out? And if you want more stories like this, subscribe.
I asked for the credentials again. Don't make me keep asking.
I'm not making anything difficult. You're turning the sidewalk stop into something else.
Name, address, why you're in this area.
I already answered that.
Then answer it again.
You need to slow down and actually look at what's in your hand.
You don't tell me how to do my job.
Then do it with judgment.
You're under
This patrolman thought he was making a simple jaywalking stop. He was actually creating the worst moment of his career. He put his hands on a calm pedestrian, ignored the credentials in the man's wallet, and treated a minor street stop like a test of control. He had no idea the man he was detaining was Lieutenant General Victor Hale, a 3-star Army officer whose identity was about to come back through dispatch. Tell me where you're watching from. If you like stories about bad policing, body cam fallout, and people exposing themselves with their own decisions, like the video and subscribe, the footage started in a downtown block near a federal hotel and conference area. City police worked that zone every day. Military staff moved through it too, usually in civilian clothes. Any officer with sense knew that. It didn't mean giving people special treatment. It meant paying attention before turning a small stop into a problem. Patrolman Eric Mays didn't pay attention. He saw a man cross outside the marked crosswalk and jumped on it right away. Traffic wasn't heavy. Nobody had slammed on the brakes. The man had already made it across and was walking toward the hotel side of the street. Mays still pulled up hard, got out, and started the stop like he had just caught somebody doing more than crossing in the wrong place. That man was Victor Hale. He was in civilian clothes after a defense-related meeting, mid-50s. Clean posture, controlled movements, no sign of panic, no aggression. On camera, he looked like a person used to order and used to pressure. He also looked like someone who expected basic professionalism. Mays opened with authority, not judgment. He announced the jaywalking stop and demanded identification almost at once. Hale answered calmly and tried to explain where he had come from. Mays cut him off. Hale tried again. Same result. That set the tone. This could have ended with a warning, maybe a brief check. 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Instead, Mays made it personal. His body cam showed a pattern that looked bad from the start. Fast commands, no patience, and no real interest in what the other man was saying. Hale did not match that energy. He stayed measured. He signaled in a controlled way that the officer was overplaying a minor stop. Mays heard confidence and treated it like disrespect. That's where bad officers get themselves in trouble. They stop handling the situation in front of them and start reacting to how they feel. Mays asked for the wallet again, sharper this time. Hale complied. He moved carefully and made it clear where he was reaching. That should have lowered the temperature. It didn't. Mays stayed wound up and took the wallet with the attitude of someone expecting to prove something. He flipped through it too fast. That mattered because the wallet didn't hold just a license and credit cards. Review notes later pointed to military credentials and access material that should have made him stop and reassess. Not because rank makes somebody untouchable. It doesn't. The issue was judgment. A smart officer sees federal or military indicators and verifies before escalating. Mays kept going like he hadn't seen any of it. He pressed for more information, name, address, why he was in the area. Hale answered. Mays kept the same tone. Short, hard, suspicious. Nothing in Hale's conduct justified that level of pressure. He wasn't evasive. He wasn't hostile. He wasn't trying to leave. Mays just wanted full control of the stop. Hale gave him another chance to fix it. He indicated that the situation was becoming serious and that the officer needed to slow down. Mays dismissed it. He treated the warning like something he'd heard from random people before. Then he made the stop worse. The body cam showed him moving in and detaining Hale over a jaywalking stop. He turned him toward the patrol car and put hands on him, even though there was still no threat, no resistance, and no real reason to use force. Hale did not fight him. He did not argue physically. He stayed controlled and let the moment play out. That left one person on camera escalating, and it wasn't the general. Mays kept issuing short commands, while Hale responded in the same steady way he had from the beginning. That contrast did more damage to the officer than he seemed to realize. One man looked disciplined. The other looked like he had lost perspective over a sidewalk stop. Then Mays checked the wallet again. He still didn't stop. That's one of the ugliest parts of the scene. Missing something once can happen. Missing it twice means the officer is no longer processing facts. He's working off ego. The incident review later made that clear. There were visible signs in that wallet that should have changed the pace, the tone, and the officer's next decision. Mays stayed on the same track. He demanded more identifying details. Hale provided them. Mays asked for his social security number. Hale gave it after making it clear, again, that the officer was creating a serious problem for himself. Mays ignored that warning too and walked back to the cruiser to run the information. Now the stop was about to leave his control. That's the danger for officers who build a whole story in their own head. The database doesn't care about their mood. Dispatch doesn't care how confident they sounded 2 minutes earlier. Once the information goes in, the facts take over. Mays radioed the name, Victor Daniel Hale. Dispatch repeated it back. He gave the date of birth, then the number. Dispatch asked him to repeat part of it. He did. A pause followed. Longer than usual. Mays stood by the cruiser waiting for the return. His body cam picked up the shift before the radio did. He looked back toward Hale. He checked the wallet again. His posture changed a little. The edge was still there, but the certainty wasn't. That pause told him something was off. He confirmed the name one more time when dispatch asked. Then he waited again. Hale stayed where Mays had placed him, calm, silent, watching. He had stopped trying to explain himself by then. There was no point. The officer had already ignored every obvious sign in front of him. The radio was going to do the job now. That was the hard part to watch back. Mays had several chances to step back before this turned into a career problem. He could have changed course when he saw Hale's demeanor. He could have changed course when the wallet came out. He could have changed course when the warning came. He passed every off-ramp because he wanted the stop to stay about him. Dispatch came back and told him to remain on scene and wait for a supervisor. That changed his face. He looked at the wallet again, slower this time. Then he looked over at Hale. The confidence was gone. He knew enough by then. He might not have had the full rank yet, but he knew the man against the cruiser was not who he had assumed. And in the next few seconds, the radio was going to make that official. Dispatch came back on a secured tone and told Patrolman Eric Mays to confirm the full name again. He did. Then dispatch gave him the rank. Lieutenant General Victor Hale. Active status. Federal clearance attached. Keep the subject on scene. Supervisor en route. That was the moment the stop collapsed. Mays had spent the last several minutes acting like he was controlling a jaywalking stop. Now he understood he had detained a 3-star general in public over a minor pedestrian violation while ignoring credentials that should have changed the whole contact. The body cam caught the change right away. His shoulders dropped. His voice lost the edge. He looked at the wallet again, but now he wasn't flipping through it to challenge anything. Now he was looking at it like it might somehow undo what had already happened. It couldn't. He walked back toward Hale, and his language changed fast. The commands were gone. The sharp tone was gone. What came out instead was the kind of rushed apology officers use when they know the facts have turned against them. Hale didn't help him. He stayed calm. He stayed direct. He told Mays that the real issue was not the jaywalking stop. The issue was judgment. The issue was that Mays had escalated first, assessed later, and ignored clear indicators the whole way through. He made it plain that this was a professionalism failure before it was anything else. That hit harder than yelling would have. Hale didn't need to raise his voice. He had already won the moment by staying in control of himself while the officer lost control of the stop. Mays started trying to explain. He referred to procedure. He referred to officer safety. He referred to needing compliance. None of it sounded strong on camera because the footage had already shown the full sequence. There had been no threat, no aggression, no reason to treat the encounter like a physical detention. Hale cut through that without getting emotional. He made the point that procedure did not excuse bad judgment. He told Mays that authority without discipline was a liability. That was the kind of correction that lands because it's true, and because the person saying it clearly knows what disciplined authority looks like. Mays removed his hands completely and stepped back. He looked around the street for a second, probably trying to figure out how exposed the scene already was. Too late for that. The body cam was running. Nearby traffic cameras covered the block. The radio log existed. Dispatch had flagged it. From that point on, the stop had a record beyond anything he could write later. Within minutes, a supervisor arrived. Sergeant Nolan Price got out of his unit already moving fast. Dispatch had given him enough to know this was not a normal field assist. He came in with the kind of face supervisors wear when they've realized one of their officers has created a problem bigger than the original stop by a factor of 50. He spoke to Mays first, low and quick. The body cam didn't catch every word clearly, but enough came through to understand the tone. Price wanted a direct explanation. Mays tried to give one. It sounded weak. There was no good version of what had happened. The footage was against him. The wallet was against him. Dispatch was against him. The subject's conduct was against him. Every part of the record pointed in the same direction. Price then turned to Hale. His tone was completely different. Professional, careful, controlled. He identified himself, acknowledged the seriousness of the stop, and made it clear that Hale was no longer being detained. He also apologized in a way that showed he understood the problem was not just mistaken identity. The problem was the officer's conduct from the first contact forward. Hale listened and answered without dragging it out. He explained that he had tried several times to de-escalate the encounter and had been ignored each time. He pointed out that Mays had seen enough in the wallet to know he needed to slow down. He also made clear that this was bigger than embarrassment. A street officer had physically detained a senior military official while failing basic standards of observation and courtesy in a shared jurisdiction area. That last point mattered. This was not just some random downtown block. It was an area where city police, federal personnel, and military officials crossed paths all the time. That meant judgment mattered more, not less. No one was asking the officer to salute anyone or waive the law. They were expecting him to act like a professional adult before escalating physical contact. Price understood that immediately. He asked Hale whether he required medical attention. Hale said no. He asked whether Hale wanted the contact documented at the scene beyond the body cam and incident record. Hale said it would be documented in full, one way or another. That answer put another level of pressure on everyone standing there. Mays stayed mostly quiet during this part. That silence said enough. He knew the stop was no longer his to explain away. His earlier confidence had been replaced by the look officers get when they realize supervisors are no longer there to support them, but to contain the damage. Another unit pulled up shortly after that. Not lights, not a dramatic entrance, just more command presence. Price was building a buffer around the scene and making sure no one made it worse. That alone told you dispatch had already elevated it internally. Hale finally addressed Mays one more time. He told him, in plain terms, that rank was not the lesson here. Character was. If Mays had handled the stop with basic courtesy, the identity check would have happened without force, without humiliation, and without consequences beyond a short conversation. Instead, he chose pressure first. That choice had now created a record no one in the department would be able to ignore. That was the cleanest summary of the whole incident. Mays didn't have a real response to it. Price then informed Hale that the matter would be referred upward immediately. That wasn't empty reassurance. At that point, referral was mandatory. The detention of a general officer in a recorded public stop was already beyond informal cleanup. Internal affairs would see it. Command staff would see it. City leadership might see it before the week was over, depending on how far the report moved and whether anyone leaked the footage. Hale gave a final, controlled answer and prepared to leave the scene. He did not rant. He did not threaten anybody. He didn't need to. He had made his point, and the evidence made the rest for him. Before Hale stepped away, Price apologized again. This time the apology sounded less like damage control and more like recognition. He knew exactly what kind of failure he was looking at. Not a paperwork mistake, not a misunderstanding. A judgment failure caught on body cam from start to finish. Mays stood there while Hale walked off. That image would matter later, because once the footage started circulating inside the department, people would focus on the same thing: how a jaywalking stop turned into a public detention only because one officer refused to slow down, refused to listen, and refused to read the obvious signs in front of him. And by the end of that night, the report, the audio, and the dispatch return were already moving to people far above Eric Mays. By the next morning, the stop had already moved beyond a bad shift report. Sergeant Nolan Price filed the immediate notification. The body cam footage was preserved. Dispatch logs were flagged. The wallet inventory, detention timeline, and supervisor response all went into the review package. Once command staff saw the basics, they treated it as a major conduct issue, not a field misunderstanding. Eric Mays was pulled from patrol before the end of the next duty cycle. That happened fast for a reason. The facts were ugly and easy to follow. He had initiated a stop over jaywalking. He had cut off explanations. He had ignored visible military credentials. He had escalated to physical detention without a real threat. Then dispatch confirmed that the pedestrian was Lieutenant General Victor Hale. There was no clean defense for any of that. Internal Affairs opened the case that week. The review focused on three things. First, Mays escalated a low-level contact without cause. Second, he failed basic scene assessment, even after seeing indicators that should have changed his approach. Third, his body cam showed a pattern of command-driven behavior that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with control. That last point hurt him the most. Departments can sometimes excuse a quick mistake. They have a harder time excusing a full chain of bad decisions on video. Mays did not make one wrong call. He made several in a row. Each one made the next one worse. The footage stayed internal at first, but not for long. People in the department talked. Supervisors reviewed it. Training officers reviewed it. Someone copied the radio summary into a chain that reached outside the unit. Within days, the stop was known across the department. After that, local reporters got wind of it. They did not need the full body cam to understand the story. A patrolman had detained a 3-star general over jaywalking after ignoring credentials during the stop. That headline moved by itself. Once the press started asking questions, city leadership got involved. The police chief's office confirmed that a formal review was underway. The mayor's staff asked for a briefing. Legal advisors looked at exposure. Hale had not created the public problem, but his position guaranteed the incident would never stay buried in paperwork. Mays was suspended pending the outcome. Hale did not go on television. He did not start a public campaign. He handled it the way he handled the stop: controlled, direct. He gave a formal statement through military channels and left the department to deal with its own mess. That made the pressure worse, not better. He was not grandstanding. He was documenting. That forced the city to take the case seriously. The full review took several weeks. Investigators compared the body cam to Mays's initial written account. That comparison made things even worse for him. His report tried to dress the stop up as a difficult compliance situation. The video showed a calm pedestrian and an officer creating tension from the start. Once that gap showed up, his credibility dropped hard. Command staff made the decision after that. Mays was terminated. The official grounds included improper detention, unnecessary escalation, failure to follow de-escalation standards, and conduct damaging to the department. He also lost any realistic chance of being hired easily by another agency in the area. A bad stop can follow an officer. A bad stop tied to a 3-star general and preserved on body cam follows him everywhere. That was the personal fallout. The department had a bigger problem. It could not blame everything on one officer and move on. The case exposed weak training and weak supervision in a district where officers routinely crossed paths with federal personnel and military officials. The chief's office had to answer a basic question. How did a patrolman in that zone think it was acceptable to force a low-level stop into a physical detention without slowing down once credentials appeared? They responded the only way they could: policy review, training changes, public damage control. By late 2025, the department issued updated field contact guidance. Officers working federal-adjacent districts had to complete new training on credential recognition, interagency awareness, and verbal de-escalation during minor enforcement stops. Supervisors were told to review body cam more aggressively for ego-driven escalation patterns. The department also added a simple rule to refresher training. When a stop stays low risk, the officer's first job is to assess, not dominate. That should have been obvious already. Now it was written down because one patrolman had forced the lesson. The case also changed how some officers in the department talked about command presence. Before this, a few of them treated command voice like the answer to everything. After this, more of them understood the difference between presence and insecurity. Presence settles a scene. Insecurity pushes it until it breaks. Victor Hale moved on with his job. He received written apologies through official channels. The city acknowledged the stop. The department documented the policy response. Hale did not need revenge. He got something more useful: a clear record, a disciplined outcome, and proof that calm conduct under pressure can expose bad judgment better than any argument. That's why this story matters. This was never really about jaywalking. It was about a patrolman who saw a minor violation and decided he needed to win a personal contest. He ignored the man in front of him. He ignored the signs in the wallet. He ignored repeated chances to slow down. Then the radio reminded him that facts do not bend to ego. That's the lesson. Authority means nothing without judgment. A badge does not fix bad instincts. And once body cam, dispatch, and supervisor review line up against an officer, confidence disappears fast. Tell me what you think. Was the firing justified, or should the department have handled it differently? Share the story with someone who understands how fast ego can ruin a career, and subscribe for more stories like this.